Manhood Part 3.
Intoxicants are like anger, they make us strong, blind and impatient, and they lead us wrong. The strength is quickly lost, we feel the error long. Temperance is reason's girdle and passion's bridle, the strength of the soul, and the foundation of virtue. In all the world there is not to be found an old man, who has been a total abstainer from intoxicating liquors through all his life, who regrets the rule he adopted and kept. Such a man was never heard to say, "I am sorry I did not learn to love wine, whiskey, ale, beer or brandy when I was young." This is a very safe rule for young men, that has not a single exception in all the wide world. On the other hand, how many have said, "Drink has been my curse"? Take the pledge, boys, keep it, and you will find it a jewel in nature, a comfort through life, and a consolation in death. One of the great curses, if not the greatest in our land, is intemperance. It is productive of murder, lawlessness, and crime, the chief agency in the corruption of the ballot, legislation and administration of the law, the voracious consumer of purity, reputation and health, and the chief architect in establishing madhouses, orphan asylums, prisons and county farms. It demands and controls annually more than $1 billion by which bread, meat, clothing, shoes and sugar could be purchased for the poor, and all schools and Christian missions supported. In silver dollars this money could be laid side by side on the equator till it formed a band around the earth, while the liquor it purchased would fill a canal 20 feet wide, 20 feet deep and 46 miles long.
The grain alone used by distilleries in the manufacture of the destructive drink is 50 million bushels, enough to furnish 300 one-pound loaves of bread to each family in the United States. No wonder that 99 of every 100 men, as John B. Goff said, are ruined morally, intellectually, and religiously by the use of drink, and that 50 of every 100 insane persons, 75 of every 100 prisoners, and 96 of every 100 tramps are made thus by this evil. Far better that every boy touch not, taste not. Longfellow said, "It will make thy heart sore to its very core. Its perfume is the breath of the angel of death, and the light that within it lies is the flash of his evil eyes. Beware, oh, beware, for sickness, sorrow and care are all there." In one of the older colleges in Massachusetts years ago, there was a boy of great promise, bearing an honored name, and concentrating in his own intellect the mental power of generations of ancestors. He was a prodigy in learning. He seized a language almost by intuition. His person was faultless, his hair like the raven's wing, his eye like the eagle's. On the day of his graduation he married a charming young lady. His profession, the law, led him to the highest office of advocacy in the state. He was Attorney General at an age when most students are admitted to the bar. Suddenly, when as yet no one knew the cause, he resigned his high appointment, giving no reasons. He was a secret drunkard. Too high was his sense of honor. and the importance of his station, to entrust himself longer with the destinies of society. As years rolled by, he sunk like a mighty ship in mid-ocean, not without many a lurch, many a sign of riding once more to plow the proud seas that were destined to entomb him forever. His lovely wife left him, and, returning to her parents, died of a broken heart. With bowed head at the grave, he wept bitterly on the head of a dear boy she had left behind. Friends of his, men of talent and piety, prayed over him, and at times he would get the better of the demon that ruled him, and again put forth his gigantic powers. The greatest effort he exerted during this period was in an important case before the Supreme Court of the United States. Marshall, the patriarch of American judges, gazed with wonder on the barrister, as burst after burst of eloquence and oratory followed. George Briggs, member of Congress from Massachusetts, seeing his splendid portrait hanging in a conspicuous place at Washington, inquired who it was, and was told that is the portrait of Talcott, the brilliant genius, the most talented man in the United States. In his last spasm of temperance, he wrote a beautiful tract, The Trial and Condemnation of Alcohol. After a fatiguing argument before a court in the city of New York, he was overpersuaded by a friend to take a glass of beer. It was his last sober moment till he was in the agonies of death. Down, down he went and never rose to assume manliness again. As the fabled phoenix is said to rise from the ashes of its parent, one of the most noble and eloquent advocates of temperance proved to be the son of this ruined genius. It is a great delusion for boys to think it manly to drink. Manliness implies strength and courage. A drunkard lacks both. He might be brutal, but he is a coward. Manliness also implies reason, and when we consider that liquor robs one of this, a boy shows his manliness by letting it alone and helping others do the same. Liquor is a poison. Incorporated in it is a deadly drug known as alcohol. Drop a little on the eye and it destroys the sight. Sprinkle a few drops on the leaf of a plant and it will kill it. Immerse a tadpole in it and it ceases to live. Drink it and its action produces weakness, and its reaction nervousness. In a word, alcohol is the devil's best drug and the boy's worst enemy. Said General Harrison, I was one of a class of 17 young men who graduated at college. The other 16 now fill drunkards' graves. I owe all my health, my happiness and prosperity to a resolution I made when starting in life, that I would avoid strong drink. That vow I have never broken.
In 1812, the town of Farmington, New Hampshire, saw a poor boy. When old enough, he was bound out to a farmer. Afterward, he learned a trade. He worked well and studied evenings. A friend took an interest in him and encouraged him to attend and speak at a political meeting. How can I be anything when my father is a drinking man, he was wont to say. He solemnly signed the pledge of total abstinence and began speech-making. Soon the young men said, let us send him to the legislature. At every step he did his best. Finally, Massachusetts sent a petition by him to Congress. John Quincy Adams invited him to dinner. While at dinner, Mr. Adams filled his glass, and turning to the young man, said, "Will you drink a glass of wine with me?" He hated to refuse. There was the ex-president of the United States, and a company of great men. All eyes were upon him, and so he hesitated and grew red in the face, but finally stammered, "Excuse me, sir, I never drink wine." The next day the whole account came out in the Washington papers. It was copied all over Massachusetts, and the people said, "Here is a man who stands by his principles. He can be trusted. Let us promote him." He was made congressman and senator. Finally, he became vice president of the country. That farmer boy was Henry Wilson. When elected to this office, he gave his friends a dinner. The table was set without one wineglass upon it. "Where are the glasses?" asked several of the guests, merrily. "Gentlemen," said Mr. Wilson, "you know my friendship and my obligation to you. Great as they are not great enough to make me forget the rock whence I was hewn and the pit whence I was dug. Some of you know how the curse of intemperance overshadowed my youth. That I might escape, I fled from my early surroundings. For what I am indebted to God, to my temperance vow, and to my adherence to it. Call for what you want to eat, and if this hotel can provide it, it shall be forthcoming. But wine and liquors cannot come to this table with my consent, because I will not spread in the path of another the snare from which I escaped."
At this, 3 rousing cheers rent the room for the man who had the courage to stand by his noble convictions. It pays to be a total abstainer. Abstinence, said Bishop Spalding, is but negative, a standing aloof from what hinders or hurts. The tendency of drink is to deaden the moral sensibilities. It weakens the nerves, impairs the brain, feeds disease, and at last bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. On the other hand, temperance is a bridle of gold, and he who uses it rightly is more like a god than a man. Nothing is so conducive to one's happiness and success in life. Burdett said, "Honor never has the delirium tremens, glory does not wear a red nose, fame blows a horn, but never takes one." There is a story told of Hannibal, the great Carthaginian, who fought so long and so successfully against the Romans, that when he was still a boy of 9 years, his father Hamilcar asked him if he would like to go to the wars with him. The child was delighted at the thought. "Then," said his father, "you must swear that you will, as long as you live, hate the Romans and fight against them." Young Hannibal took the oath, and all through life was the bitter enemy of Rome. He took sides with his father and his country against the proud foes. The boy who wishes to succeed in life must incorporate no liquor in his resolutions, and under all circumstances refuse it, choosing rather to be an advocate of ennobling temperance. It pays to be a total abstainer, because it is right. It is not so much a question of dollars saved or happiness promoted as a question of right. Said Amos Lawrence, "Young men, base all your actions upon the sense of right, and in so doing, never reckon the cost." In the army, drinking and treating were common occurrences. One noble captain had the heroism to decline the oft-proffered treat. An observer asked, "Do you always reject intoxicating liquor?" "Yes." "Do you not take it to correct this Yazoo water?" "Never." "You must have belonged to the cold water army in your youth." "Yes, but I learned something better than that. My mother taught me that what is right, and coming to Mississippi makes no difference. It would not be right for me to accept an invitation to drink at home. It is no more right here, therefore I don't drink." Some time after, an officer met a lady who wanted to see one who had met her boy, naming his office and regiment. He told her of the noble examples of piety which were found in the army and related the case of the captain. She exclaimed, "That's beautiful. That's beautiful. His mother must be proud of him." "Yes, she is, and you are that mother." Amid grateful tears she exclaimed, "Is that my boy? Is that my Will? It's just like him, I knew he would do so. He was a good boy. He told me he always would be, and I knew he would." Beautiful trust. Excellent commendation. Would that it could be said of every boy. It pays to be a total abstainer for the sake of those who suffer through intemperance. The good and wise Governor Buckingham, of Connecticut, gave us his reason for being a total abstainer: "If I indulge, I am not safe." There is no degradation so low that a man will not sink to it, and no crime so hellish that he will not commit it, when he is drunk. But if it could be proved conclusively to my own mind that I could drink and never be injured, yet I could not be certain but others, seeing me drink, might be influenced to drink also, and, being unable to stop, pass on in the path of the drunkard. Were many more as considerate, there would be less drinking husbands, and less despised and taunted children because of drunken fathers. Who would ever think of a $2 bill relating a sad story and giving a pathetic warning? Yet such a bill was brought to the office of a temperance union recently. Written in red ink, a poor man told what liquor had done for him, and what it would do for others. Here is what it said: "Wife, children and $40,000 all gone. I alone am responsible. All have gone down my throat.
When I was 21 I had a fortune. I am now 35 years old. I have killed my beautiful wife, who died of a broken heart, have murdered my children with neglect. When this bill is gone, I do not know how I am to get my next meal. I shall die a drunken pauper. 'Tis my last money and my history. If this bill comes into the hands of any man who drinks, let him take warning from my ruin." When Colonel Alexander Hoagland was sitting in his room at Louisville some years ago, a lame boy knocked at the door. Said he, "My father is to be hung tomorrow. The governor will not pardon him. He killed my mother when he was drunk. He was a good father, and we were always happy only when he drank. Won't you go and talk and pray with him, and then come to our house when his body is brought to us?" The colonel did as requested, and found that the demon drink was the sole cause of that family's ruin. The father was hung, and when the body was taken to the home, he was there. 6 worse than orphans were curled up on a bundle of straw and rags, crying with a grief that would make the stoutest heart quail. The crippled boy, but 14 years of age, was the sole support of the little family. The father's body was brought in by 2 officers. The plain board coffin was rested upon 2 old chairs, and the officers hurried out of the room and away from the terrible scene. "Come," said the crippled boy, "come and kiss Papa's face before it gets cold," and all 6 children kissed the face of that father, and, smoothing the brow, sobbed in broken accents, "Whiskey did it. Papa was good, but whiskey did it. My boy, be temperate. Do your best to stop another such scene. Sign the pledge. Talk against, work against, and when able, vote against the liquor interests." "Woe to the man or boy who becomes a slave to liquor," said General Phil. Sheridan.
I had rather see my son die today than to see him carried to his mother drunk. One of my brave soldier boys on the field said to me just before a battle, "Tell mother, if I am killed, I have kept my promise to her. Not one drink have I ever tasted." The boy was killed. I carried the message with my own lips to the mother. She said, "General, that is more glory for my boy than if he had taken a city." The influence of example is always a powerful one. With such widespread habits as those of tobacco smoking and chewing, it is little wonder why so many boys indulge. They see only the pleasurable side of these habits, but it devolves upon us, from our daily experience with the ills that flesh is heir to make known to you, young friend, the dangers lurking in these seductive vices. We doctors are often consulted by victims of these habits, who are quite surprised upon stopping the use of tobacco to find to what a degree they have become enslaved. That the baneful effect from the use of tobacco is universally recognized is evidenced by the fact of its prohibition in schools and naval academies, and by the laws now in force in several of the states and also in Germany, making it illegal to sell tobacco to any under 16 years of age. Tobacco is especially injurious to those subjected to severe mental strain or physical training, and to such as are engaged in delicate manual work. The symptoms are many. Digestion is sometimes greatly impaired. On the heart, the effect is very noticeable. My advice to boys is not to use tobacco in any form. An old monk was once walking through a forest, with a scholar by his side. He suddenly stopped and pointed to 4 plants that were close at hand. The first was just beginning to peep above the ground, the second had rooted itself well into the earth, the third was a small shrub, while the fourth was a full-sized tree. Turning to his young companion, he said, "Pull up the first." The boy easily did so. "Now pull up the second." The youth obeyed, but not so easily. "And now the third." The boy had to put forth all his strength, and use both arms, before he succeeded in uprooting it. "And now," said the master, "try your hand upon the fourth." But although the lad grasped the trunk of the tree in his arms, he scarcely shook its leaves, and found it impossible to tear its roots from the earth. Then the wise old man explained to his scholar the meaning of the 4 trials. "This, my son, is just what happens with our bad habits and passions. When they are young and weak, one may, by a little watchfulness over self, easily tear them up. But if we let them cast their roots deep down into our souls, no human power can uproot them. Only the almighty hand of the Creator can pluck them out. For this reason, my boy, watch your first impulses." Tobacco using is frequently the beginning and stepping stone to other vices. Many who have hesitated in entering a saloon or gambling place have not done so in the use of tobacco. The origin of tobacco is shrouded in mystery. Mezin was of the opinion that the Chinese used it from antiquity. Dr. Lizard says it existed in Asia from early times. Columbus in his discovery of Cuba tells how he found the natives carrying with them firebrands, puffing smoke from their mouths and noses, which he supposed to be the way they had of perfuming themselves.
An ancient tradition relates that there was once a Mohammedan passing along who found a viper lying in his path, almost chilled to death. In pity, the Moslem stooped, picked up the serpent, and put it into his bosom to warm it. After a while, the viper fully revived and became aware of its situation. He said to the man, "I'm going to bite you." "Oh, no. Please don't," said the man. "If I had not taken you up and warmed you, you would even now have been chilled to death." The viper replied, "There has been a deadly enmity existing between your race and mine ever since the world began, and by Allah, I am going to bite you." "Very well," said the man, "since you have sworn by Allah, I will not prevent you, but bite me here on my hand." He did so, and the man immediately placed the wound to his lips and sucked the venom out and spit it on the ground, and from the place where he spit the poison a little plant sprang up, which was tobacco. Though this story be not true, yet true it is that tobacco contains a very strong poison, known as nicotine, supposed to be the juice of cursed Hebanon, referred to in Hamlet. In 1 pound of Kentucky and Virginia tobacco, there is, according to Dr. Kellogg, an average of 380 grains of this poison, which is estimated to kill 250 people if applied in its native form. "A single leaf of tobacco dipped in hot water," said Dr. Coles, "and laid upon the pit of the stomach will produce a powerful effect by mere absorption from the surface. By being applied to a spot where the scarf skin, or external surface of the skin is destroyed, fearful results are liable to follow, and no man can use it without being affected by it." Tobacco injures physically. "No less," said Dr. Shaw, "than 80 diseases arise from it, and 25,000 lives perish annually from it." A young man asked Wendell Phillips if he should smoke, and that statesman answered, "Certainly not."
It is liable to injure the sight, to render the nerves unsteady, to enfeeble the will and enslave the nature to an imperious habit likely to stand in the way of duty to be performed. Many professors of leading colleges have asserted with figures to prove that boys who begin the tobacco habit are stunted physically and never arise to the normal bodily development. Tobacco injures mentally. Beecher said, "A man is what he is, not in one part, but all over." And to have a strong mind, one needs a strong stomach. By the use of tobacco, the stomach is outraged and the brain becomes narcotized, the intellect of which, said Professor Gauze, becomes duller and duller until at last it is painful to make any intellectual effort and one sinks into a sensuous or sensual animal, whose greatest aspiration is to benumb the nerves and befog the intellect. Such assertions may be ridiculed, but as 2 and 2 make 4, they are facts. The French government prohibits its use by students in the public schools. The Swiss government prohibits its sale to juniors. During the last 50 years, no user of it has graduated from Yale, Harvard, or Amherst at the head of his class. Professor Seeley, of the Iowa State Normal, said, "I have not met a pupil who is addicted to the habit who will go through a single day's work and have good lessons. I have had numbers of cases in which they have remained in the same grade for 4 successive years, and then they were not ready to be advanced into the next higher grade." Dr. Herbert Fisk, of the Northwestern University, Chicago, declared, "A somewhat careful observation of facts has convinced us that students who get low marks do so through the use of tobacco. Last year, not one of the boys who used tobacco stood in the first rank of scholarship. This has been the usual rule. One year, out of 33 pupils in the first rank of scholarship, there was but 1 user of tobacco."
Dr. Charles A. Blanchard, president of Wheaton College, said, "Among our former students who are now physicians, the one who has the largest income never touched tobacco. Two are now judges of courts in large cities, with salaries of $6,000 or $7,000. They do not and have not for years used tobacco. Other men, who after graduation became smokers, do not exhibit the same mental ability. They are, some of them, very able men, but they suffer in mind from the use of tobacco. Tobacco injures morally. It heads the list of vices. It is the first step to bad companionship, lewd conversation and liquor drinking. The latter and tobacco using are twin habits, and do you wonder at it when tobacco is saturated with Jamaica rum, while plug tobacco, which is composed of licorice, sugar, cabbage, burdock and the refuse of tobacco leaves and other weeds, is often found nailed at the bottom of whiskey barrels? Said Horace Greeley, "Show me a drunkard who does not use tobacco, and I will show you a white blackbird." Many medical witnesses testify that tobacco using and drinking are kindred habits. When an investigation was made in the state prison at Auburn, NY, some years ago, out of 600 prisoners confined there for crimes committed when they were under the influence of strong drink, 500 testified that they began their intemperance by the use of tobacco. "In all my travels," said John Hawkins, "I never saw but one drunkard who did not use tobacco." "Pupils under the influence of the weed," said Professor Seeley, "are not truthful, practice deception and cannot be depended upon. The worst characteristic of the habit is a loss of personal self-respect and of personal regard for the customs and wishes of ladies and gentlemen, especially when among strangers." Tobacco is used in two ways, smoking and chewing. Both are filthy, sickening habits, the latter being the more disgusting. For any boy to chew is to exemplify bad manners doubtless influenced by bad morals.
A few years ago, a call was issued from London to the scientists of the world to assemble for the discussion of whatever scientific subjects might be presented, every statement to undergo rigid scrutiny. One member said, "Tobacco is not injurious. I have chewed it for 50 years, and my father for 60 years, without perceptible damage. All this cry about it is nonsense." The chairman answered, "Step forward, sir, and let us canvass this matter thoroughly. How much do you chew?" "I chew regularly 3 quids per day, of about this size," cutting off 3 pieces from his plug. One of these was given to a Russian and another to a French chemist, with "Please return the extract." Then the presiding officer said, "Will any young man unaccustomed to the use of tobacco chew this 3rd quid before the audience? Here are £4, $20, to anyone who will." A young man stepped forward. The audience was requested to scan his looks, cheeks, eyes, and general appearance before he took it, and closely watch its effects. He soon became pale from sickness, then vomited and fainted before the assembly. The extract from 1 quid was given to a powerful cat. He flew wildly around and died in a few minutes. The other extract was put upon the tongue of a premium dog, which uttered a yelp, leaped frantically, laid down, and expired. Smoking tobacco is used in 3 ways, in the pipe, cigar, and cigarette. Neither adds beauty to the face or is conducive to health. It is stated on good authority that Senator Colfax was stricken down in the Senate chamber as the result of excessive smoking, and from that time smoked no more. It caused the death of Emperor Frederick through cancer of the lip, killed Henry W. Raymond of the New York Times through heart failure, and struck President Orton and General Dakin down with paralysis of the heart. Rousseau says, excessive smoking cut short the life of the poet Barat through nervous effect.
It wielded its scepter over Royer Collard, who died in the dawn of a most brilliant career through his loved cigar. It produced cancer of the throat, which ended the life of President Grant and Robert Louis Stevenson. Out of 127 cancers cut from the lips of persons in a short time, says the Medical Times, nearly all were from the lips of smokers. What a dangerous luxuriant weed! How quaintly yet truthfully Billy Bray, the Cornish miner, said, if God intended a man to smoke, he would have placed a chimney at the top of his head to let the smoke out. Tobacco smoke is poisonous. It contains one of the deadliest vapors known to man, which so frequently injures the throat. It has also a poisonous oil which secretes itself in the stem of the pipe. Dr. Brodie says that he applied 2 drops of this oil to the tongue of a cat, which killed it in 15 minutes. Fontana made a small incision in the leg of a pigeon and paralyzed it by applying a drop of this oil. The reason for so many pale-faced, nervous men can be traced to this cause. But supposing that smoking a pipe is not injurious, is it not unbecoming a gentleman? Napoleon said it was only fit for sluggards. Gouverneur Morris, being asked if gentlemen smoked in France, replied, "Gentlemen, sir. Gentlemen smoke nowhere." Horace Mann, when addressing the teachers of an Ohio school, said, "The practice is unfit for a scholar or a gentleman." To smoke a cigar may be considered more refined than the use of a pipe. But whoever heard of refining a vice? Horace Greeley, when addressing a class of young men on the subject, said, "A cigar is a little roll of tobacco leaves with a fire at one end and a fool at the other." At which end should refinement begin? The cigar is more directly injurious than the pipe because the user inhales more of the smoke, sucks the weed, and a greater proportion of the poisonous substance is drawn into the mouth and filtered through the system, causing dyspepsia, vitiated taste, congestion of the brain, loss of memory, nervousness, and many other diseases.
The worst of all, however, is the cigarette. Some time ago in New York, an Italian boy was brought before a justice as a vagrant. He was charged with picking up cigar stumps from the streets and gutters. To prove this, the policeman showed the boy's basket, half full of stumps, water-soaked and covered with mud. "What do you do with these?" asked His Honor. "I sell them to a man for 10 cents a pound, to be used in making cigarettes." This is not all. In the analysis of cigarettes, physicians and chemists have been surprised to find opium, which is used to give a soothing effect, and creates a passion for strong drink. The wrapper, warranted to be rice paper, is manufactured from filthy scrapings of rag pickers, and is so cheap that 1,000 cigarettes can be wrapped at a cost of 2 cents. By the use of this dangerous thing, thousands of boys have been mentally and morally ruined. A distinguished French physician investigated the effect of cigarette smoking in 38 boys between the ages of 9 and 15. 27 presented distinct symptoms of nicotine poisoning. 22 had serious disorders and a marked appetite for strong drink. 3 had heart affection. 8 had very impure blood. 12 were subject to bleeding of the nose. 10 had disturbed sleep and 4 had ulceration of the mouth. Several years ago, Representatives Cochran, Cummings, and Stahlnecker of New York petitioned the government to suppress cigarettes by imposing an internal revenue tax upon them. During 1 year, they cut clippings from the papers concerning 100 young men, mostly under 16, who died from the effects of these murderous things, while another 100 were consigned to insane asylums for the same cause. Because of such harmful effects, Germany has legislated against it. France, West Point and Annapolis have closed their doors to the boy that uses it, and more than a score of states in the Union have prohibited their sale. A young man who had failed by only 3 points in an examination for admission to the Marine Corps appealed to his representative in Congress for assistance, and together they went to see the Secretary of the Navy, in the hope of securing what is known as a re-rating of his papers. "How many more chances do you want?" asked Secretary Long. "This is your 3rd time." And before the young man had a chance to answer, the secretary continued, "How do you expect to get along in the world when you smoke so many cigarettes? Your clothes are saturated with their odor. Pull off your gloves and let me see your fingers. There, see how yellow they are," pointing to the sides of the first and second fingers. Before the young man found his tongue to offer an explanation, the secretary asked if he drank. "Only once in a while," was his sheepish reply. Mr. Long then invited the congressman into his private office, and while offering to do everything that he could added, "I am sick of trying to make anything of these boys that are loaded with cigarette smoke and drink once in a while. They are about hopeless, it seems to me." As they left the department building, the young man, half apologizing for his poor showing, remarked, "Drinking, my father says, is the bane of the Navy." "I guess it is," replied the congressman. "It is the bane everywhere else, and I should think quite likely it would be in the Navy. My boy, let tobacco in any form alone. It is a dirty, dangerous, expensive habit. It costs this country $650 million annually. Worse than the cost, however, is the injury to body, mind, and soul. Figures cannot enumerate, nor scales estimate the evil it produces. A story is told of a giant who fell in with a company of pygmies. He roared with laughter at their insignificant stature and their magnificent pretensions. He ridiculed with fine scorn and sarcasm their high-sounding threats. When he fell asleep, they bound him with innumerable threads, and when he awoke he found himself a helpless captive.
My boy, ridicule not the contents of this chapter. They are all important. Heed the warning cry and shun the weed. Many a fair lad has been stunted in development, lost to ambition, sunk to all appeals to honor when once in its grasp. Therefore let it alone. The God that made your mouth made the weed, but he did not make the mouth for the tobacco, nor the tobacco for the mouth. If addicted to it, I charge you stop right now. To do so,
is to succeed. Our fight is waged in heaven's approving sight. The smile of God is victory. A boy should carefully consider his natural bent or inclination, be it business or profession. In other words, take stock of himself and ascertain, if possible, for what he is adapted, and endeavor to get into that vocation with as few changes as possible. Having entered upon it, let him pursue the work in hand with diligence and determination to know it thoroughly, which can only be done by close and enthusiastic application of the powers at his command. Strive to master the details and put into it an energy directed by strong common sense so as to make his services of value wherever he is. Be alert and ready to seize opportunities when they present themselves. The trouble with most young people is that they do not learn anything thoroughly, and are apt to do the work committed to them in a careless manner, forgetting that what is worth doing at all is worth doing well. They become mere drones, and rely upon chance to bring them success. There are others who want to do that for which they are not fitted, and thus waste their lives in what may be called misfit occupations. Far better be a good carpenter or mechanic of any kind than a poor business or professional man. All things come to him who waits is a pretty sentiment, but practical application hews the way. No great book was ever written at one sitting. Edward Gibbon was 20 years composing The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and Noah Webster was 35 years in producing the dictionary that bears his name.
No great address was the result of a moment's inspiration. When Dr. Lyman Beecher was asked how long he was preparing a certain speech which had electrified his audience, he answered, 40 years. No great invention sprang from a dream. George Stephenson was 15 years making improvements on his locomotive before he won the victory of Rainhill, and when asked by a company of young men how they might succeed, answered, "Do as I have done, persevere. Attempt the end, and never stand to doubt. Nothing's so hard, but search will find it out." One of the great manufacturing firms in Glasgow, Scotland, owes its prosperity largely to a boy whom they engaged. The story runs that 30 years ago a barefoot, ragged boy presented himself at the desk of the chief partner and asked for work as an errand boy. "There's a deal of running to be done, and you will need a pair of shoes first," said Mr. Blank. The boy, with a grave nod, disappeared. He lived by doing odd jobs in the market and slept under the stalls. 2 months passed before he had saved money enough to buy the shoes. He then presented himself to Mr. Blank and held out a package. "I have the shoes, sir," he quietly said. "Oh," the proprietor remarked, "you want a place?" "Not in those rags, my lad. You would disgrace the house." The boy hesitated a moment and then went out without a word. 6 months passed before he returned, decently clothed in coarse but new garments. Mr. Blank's interest was aroused. For the first time he looked at the lad attentively. His thin, bloodless face showed that he had stinted himself of food in order to buy those clothes. On questioning him, the manufacturer found to his regret that he could not read or write. "It is necessary that you should do both before we could employ you in carrying home packages," he said. "We have no place for you." The lad's face grew paler, but without a word of complaint he left. He now found employment in a stable and went to night school. At the end of a year he again presented himself before Mr. Blank. "I can read and write," he joyfully said. "I gave him the place," the employer remarked years after, with the conviction that in process of time he would take mine, if he made up his mind to do it. Men rise slowly in Scotland, but today he is our chief foreman. How true as St. Paul says in Meyer's poem. Let no man think that sudden in a minute. All is accomplished, and the work is done. Though with thine earliest dawn thou shouldst begin it. Scarce were it ended in thy setting Sunday. No word should be more prominent in any boy's vocabulary than perseverance. Industry is a good word, but one may be industrious without being persevering, but he cannot be persevering without being industrious. Perseverance means persistence in any design, steadiness in pursuit, constancy in progress. It is the bending of all energies in one direction till the thing is accomplished. Demosthenes was a stammerer. He would be an orator, and with pebbles in his mouth walked the seashore articulating, until when Philip threatened to invade Athens, he with matchless oratory so appealed to the Athenians that they cried, "Let us fight Philip." Fight they did, and Greece was saved. James what was poor and unlettered. He sees the lid of the kettle rise and fall by the power of steam, and from that day bends his mind and hand until in after years he creates a steam engine. Gutenberg beholds the coarse types of Lawrence Coster and declares he can do better.
After much persecution by superstitious persons, he shuts himself up in a cell of St. Arbogast Monastery and works early and late till he has carved lead type, made an ink roller and built a printing press. Marcus Morton wants to be governor of Massachusetts. 17 times he runs for the position and at last succeeds. Cyrus Field spends 11 years before he succeeds in designing and laying the Atlantic cable. Edison makes 1,800 experiments before he discovers the proper substance for the incandescent light, and 6,000 before he solves the problem of preparing the products of the great iron mills for the blast furnace. The boy who expects to succeed may have to try many times and face many opposing forces, but as adverse winds aid the kite to fly, so difficulties are usually blessings in disguise. To climb alpine peaks will put to proof the energies of him who would reach the summit. Nothing guarantees success like persistency. It is more effective than brilliancy. The faculty of sticking and hanging on when everybody else lets go is one of the secrets of success. When Congress and the country were excited over President Johnson's effort to drive Mr. Stanton from the cabinet because he opposed the president's policy in the South, Charles Sumner sent the secretary this message, "Stanton stick." He did so to the benefit of the nation. The boy who expects to make his mark in the world must be a sticker. He must keep everlastingly at it. With determination he must conquer opposition and annihilate obstacles. With pit he must trample on so-called impossibilities. Impossible is not found in the dictionary of fools, said Napoleon, when told that the Alps stood in the way of his conquest. Impossible, cried Chatham, when confined to his room with gout, who talks to me of impossibilities? Lord Anson had sent word that it was impossible to fit out a naval expedition within a prescribed period.
Tell him that he serves under a minister who treads on impossibilities. When Daniel Webster was speaking at Bunker Hill, the crowd became so large and pressed so near to him that he shouted, "Keep back! Keep back!" "It is impossible," cried someone in the crowd. The orator looked at them a moment and then said, "Nothing is impossible at Bunker Hill." And few things are impossible to persevering lads. Tamerlane was once forced to take shelter from his enemies in a ruined building, where he sat discouraged for hours. His attention was at last attracted by an ant that was carrying a grain of corn larger than itself up a high wall. 69 times did the grain fall, but the insect persevered, and the 70th time it reached the top. That sight instilled courage in the bosom of Tamerlane. Robert Bruce, of Scotland, had a similar experience. On one occasion he was so harassed by the English that he was compelled to take shelter in a barn overnight. In the morning he saw a spider climbing a beam of the roof. 12 times in succession did it fall, but the 13th time it succeeded in gaining the top. The object lesson impressed Bruce. Rising, he said, "This spider has taught me perseverance. I will follow its example. 12 times I have been beaten, and the 13th time I may succeed." He rallied his forces, met and defeated Edward, and was crowned king. Christopher Columbus conceived the idea that undiscovered continents existed west of the Atlantic, and he determined to test the truth of his theory. He had many difficulties to contend with, such as poverty and repeated discouragements.
The court of Portugal disappointed him, his native city of Genoa would not render him aid, and the city of Venice refused him. At last he laid his cause before Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Spain, and he was about to give up and repair to France, when the Queen sold her jewels to defray the expenses of the expedition. Thus assisted, he turned his ships westward and started. On board his vessel he had ignorance, superstition, and mutiny to contend with, and this continued until the cry of land. Land came from the lookout at the top of the mast, then a new world and a glorious triumph crowned his efforts. Great results are not accomplished in a moment. Sowing precedes reaping. The wheat must first be sifted and crushed in the mill before it is baked into bread. The railroad that runs from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast is but numerous steel rails placed one before the other. The president in the White House, the general in the army, the judge on the bench, the orator on the platform reached their positions, not by a hop, skip, and jump manner, but by perpetual pushing and concentration of their energies in one direction. There might have been times when these were sidetracked and their procedure necessarily slow, but as soon as the main track was clear, or as soon as they had cleared it, they went forth with undaunted persistence, realizing, as the Italian proverb reads, "Who goes slowly goes long, and goes far," and contentment was not theirs till the goal was reached. To such of like determination, in Richelieu's words, "Fail, fail." In the lexicon of youth, which fate reserves for a bright manhood, there is no such word as fail. True, many persevering persons fail as men call failure, but it is only like the tiger's crouch before a high leap. Discovering the bounds through a sense of such, life thenceforth turns all its capacities into right and effective uses.
To change and to change for the better are two different things, says an old German proverb. Pestalozzi, the great educator, made several failures in early life, which he made stepping stones to success. Washington's military career was a series of failures. He shared in Braddock's defeat at Fort Duquesne. He was beaten at Long Island, driven from New York and forced to retreat through New Jersey and across the Delaware, when he suddenly turned like a lion at bay, recrossed the icy stream and overwhelmed the Hessians at Trenton. This rapid movement and his attack at Germantown first led observers like Frederick the Great to recognize his military genius. Peter Cooper failed in making hats, failed as a cabinet maker, locomotive builder, and grocer, but as often as he failed he tried and tried again until he could stand upon his feet alone, then crowned his victory by giving $1 million to help poor boys in time to come. Horace Greeley tried 3 or 4 lines of business before he founded the Tribune, and made it worth $1 million. Patrick Henry failed as merchant and farmer, but resorting to law and politics was a brilliant success. Stephen A. Douglas made dinner tables, bedsteads, and bureaus many a long year before he made himself a giant on the floor of Congress. Abraham Lincoln failed to make both ends meet by chopping wood, failed to earn his salt in the galley slave life of a Mississippi flatboatman. He had not even wit enough to run a grocery, and yet he made himself the grandest character of the 19th century, an emancipator of 4 million slaves. General Grant failed at everything. At the age of 39 he was obscure. At 43 his picture hung in the homes of the grateful millions. He first learned to tan hides, but could not sell leather enough to buy a pair of breeches, then teamed for $40 a month, then entered his father's store at Galena, Illinois, as clerk, and to use his own words, "Nor had I any capacity to become one."
Then he enlisted as a soldier, was the hero of Appomattox, and eventually reached the highest position of honor this country can give, the presidency. When Daniel Webster was told that his profession of law was overcrowded and that the chances were against him, he replied, "Overcrowded? There is always room at the top. The condition of affairs is still the same. No reason can be produced why a persevering lad cannot make his way in the world today as in any other day. For as the philosopher Young declared, any man can do what any other man has done."
There is always a way to rise, my boy, always a way to advance. Yet the road that leads to Mount Success does not pass by the way of chance, but goes through stations of work and strive, through the valley of persevere. And the man that succeeds while others fail must be willing to pay most dear. For there's always a way to fail, my boy, always a way to slide. And the men that you find at the foot of the hill all sought for an easy ride. So on and up, though the road be rough, and the storms come thick and fast, there is room at the top for the man who tries, and victory comes at last.
My boy, be persevering. Form good resolutions. They mean success, triumph, victory. He who resolves upon doing a thing, by that very resolution scales the barriers to it, and secures its achievement. To determine upon attainment is often attainment itself. Aim high and pursue the path accordingly. Let others be indolent and indifferent, but press toward the goal of your ambition. As Mr. Dickens' friend would have us understand, its dog does it. Eustace, said William Carey, the founder of modern missions, to his wife, if they write my life, and say I am a genius, they will say falsely, but if they say I can plod, they will tell the truth. Yes, Eustace, I can plod. Yes, sir, said Whitcomb Riley to one who was nearly heartbroken because his manuscripts were constantly returned, through years, through sleepless nights, through almost hopeless days. For 20 years I tried to get into one magazine, back came my manuscripts eternally. I kept on. In the 20th year that magazine accepted one of my articles. I was not a believer in the theory that one man does a thing much easier than any other man. Continuous, unflagging effort, persistence and determination will win. Let not the man be discouraged who has these. Peg away, keep pegging away, was Lincoln's reply to one who wanted to know what he intended to do concerning the cessation of the Civil War. Plan carefully and begin planning now. When Alexander was asked how he had been able to conquer the world, he said, by not delaying. Sir Robert Peel became a great orator and statesman by practicing when a boy before his father, repeating to the best of his ability any address he heard. Kepler solved the laws of the planetary system and exposed the absurd notions of the Ptolemaic theory of axles and cranks by which the planets were strung together, but it took him 17 years from the time he began until he met success, and then he exclaimed in his enthusiasm, "Nothing holds me. The die is cast.
The book is written to be read now or by posterity, I care not which. It may well wait a century for a reader, since God has waited 6,000 years for an observer. To be wavering and dilatory is to close opportunity's gate and not infrequently make life unsuccessful. A young man, the son of an old friend of Mr. Vanderbilt, once solicited his influence in aiding him to secure a certain very desirable clerkship in a railroad office. Mr. Vanderbilt, who liked the young man and believed in his ability, agreed to help him. "Be here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, he said, "and I will go with you to see the president of the road and say a good word for you." The next morning at 20 minutes after 10 the young man appeared in the anteroom of Mr. Vanderbilt's office. He was informed that Mr. Vanderbilt had left 15 minutes before to attend a meeting. A few days later he called on Mr. Vanderbilt, and said, with a shade of annoyance in his tone, "Why, Mr. Vanderbilt, I was here just after 10. "But the appointment was 10, replied Mr. Vanderbilt. "It was only a matter of 15 or 20 minutes, said the young man. "Well," answered Mr. Vanderbilt, "the 20 minutes in your case have lost you the position, for the appointment was made the very day on which you were to have met me." Furthermore, let me tell you, you had no right to assume that 20 minutes of my time was of so little value that I could afford to wait for you. Why, sir, I managed to keep 2 other appointments of importance within that time. Be prompt. Keep in mind the words Edmund Burke wrote on a tablet for the Marquis of Rockingham, remember, resemble, persevere. Judson, when completing the translation of the Bible into the Burmese language, said, "Thanks be to God, I can now say I have attained." Arago, the great French astronomer, tells how he became so discouraged in the study of mathematics that he almost resolved to abandon his efforts. He was just about ready to give up when he happened to notice something printed or written under the paper binding of his book. He unfolded the leaf, and found it was a letter from D'Alembert, which read, "Go on, sir, go on. The difficulties you meet will resolve themselves as you advance. Persevere, and the light will dawn and shine with increasing clearness upon your path." This striking passage made an impression upon the young mathematician's mind which he never forgot. It was a perpetual spur to his ambition, and came to him just in the nick of time. He resolved then and there that he would surmount every difficulty, that he would become a great mathematician, and ere long fame crowned him as one of the greatest astronomers of his time. Go on, my boy. There's not a profession or business, but
wants a lad who has no fear of steady, plodding work, who does not wait for luck or fate, who scorns a task to shirk, who slowly, surely, digs his way through problems hard to score, and still has grit and courage left to try as many more, who does not wait for help to come from fairy, witch, or elf, but laying hold on fortune's wheel, turns it around himself, who knows that luck is but a myth, and faith is but a name, that plod and push and perseverance at last will win the game.
3 things to do, think, live, act. 3 things to govern, temper, tongue, and conduct. 3 things to cherish, virtue, goodness, and honor. 3 things to hate, cruelty, arrogance, and ingratitude. 3 things to like, cordiality, goodness, and cheerfulness. 3 things to delight in, beauty, frankness, and freedom. 3 things to avoid, idleness, loquacity, and jesting. 3 things to cultivate, good looks, good friends, and good humor. 3 things to shun, Satan, sin, and selfishness. Happy the boy, and happy he alone, he who can call today his own, he who, secure within, can say, "Tomorrow do thy worst, for I have lived today." Disobedience to parents is one of the fruitful sources from which our reform schools are filled, and, afterward, as a result of which, many young men drift into our penitentiaries. We often find fault with our lawmakers, and sometimes justly, but it is a comforting thought that if all our laws, bad as some of them may be, were obeyed at all times by everybody, there would be no inmates of our reform schools or penitentiaries, provided there should be no violation of parental authority, as well. Obedience to law, parental and governmental, would bring absolute happiness to our homes and hearts as nearly as such a condition is possible with our earthly surroundings. Let the boys remember this at all times, and build on this foundation early in life a structure that will always prove a valuable and invaluable investment. In this second portion of our subject, we find that relationship broadens. Instead of dealing only with ourselves, we deal with others. Man is a social being, but is only worthy of that name as he seeks to make society happier and better by his presence. Each day every boy is compelled to choose between 2 courses of conduct, duty and disobedience. The one, however great the cost, is accompanied by a sense of right, the other, which demands no effort, by anguish and peril. No boy need hesitate to be dutiful. Conscience dictates, reason approves, and though the triumphs of genius might be more dazzling, the chances of good fortune more exciting, yet he who heeds the counsel will profit thereby, daring nobly, willing strongly, and succeeding admirably. In the Museo Borbonico, at Naples, are seen the helmet, lance, and breastplate which were used by a pagan sentinel at Pompeii. It is thought that the soldier who used them was on duty when Mount Vesuvius began to rain burning lava upon the city. While others fled, he stood by his post. Of Wellington it was said, He never boasted of a higher motive and perhaps never thought of one than duty. Admiral Nelson, while standing on the deck of his vessel, received a mortal wound, and on being afterward assured that the conquest was theirs, exclaimed, "Thank God, I have done my duty," and died. When Frederick the Great was about to engage in the great battle of Lutzen, he ordered all his officers to a conference at which he said, "Tomorrow I intend giving the enemy battle, and the battle shall decide who are hereafter to be masters of Silesia. I expect everyone to do his duty. Now, if any of you are cowards, step forward before you make others cowardly, and you shall immediately receive your discharge without ceremony or reproach." As none stepped forward, he said, "I see there is none among you who does not possess true heroism, and who will not display it in defense of the king, the country, and himself. I will be in the front and rear, and will fly from wing to wing. No company of my soldiers shall escape my notice, and whomsoever I find doing his duty, upon him will I heap honor and favor."